There's a word that is in all three of our readings. Did you catch it? It's the word son. But first, as we started our first reading from the prophet Jeremiah, he is given this message to proclaim to God's people, and it is to say, the Lord has delivered his people. And this is good news. This is encouraging. Do you believe that God has delivered you? Delivered you from what? Delivered you from, I'm going to use a word very loosely, delivered you from addictions, right? From whatever is holding us down and keeping us from accepting God. But when we're addicted to things, and again, I'm using that word loosely, such as work. I'm addicted to work. Or maybe criticizing the people I love the most. Maybe both of those come out of my own perfectionism. I'm the one, if you want something done, and want it done right, you got to do it yourself. So I'm going to work, and I'm not going to rely on other people. And every time someone I care about doesn't do something right, I'm going to let them know about it because I care enough that they should be perfect too. How come they never come around that often? I don't understand. Maybe it's addiction to screen time, video games, social media, whatever it is that keeps us from actually being social. And of course, whatever keeps us from recognizing and paying attention to God. Maybe it's the stronger addictions, like gambling or alcohol or inappropriate relationships, whether you're in them or just watching them. The Lord has delivered his people. Will you allow yourself to be delivered by God and to let go of those distractions and to call out to God in your weakness, your need for him and his deliverance for you? Because God says, as he continues through Jeremiah, I will gather them from the ends of the world, with the blind and the lame in their midst. He is not afraid of our weaknesses. He calls out to us no matter where we're at, and he's willing to go to the ends of the world for you. No matter how far you've run, no matter how long you've run, God calls out to you. And he says, for I am a father to Israel. Ephraim is my firstborn. So those are two real people in the line of Abraham, Isaac. Jacob's name is Israel. Jacob is Israel. Ephraim along that line too. And he says, you are part of my chosen people. You are my son. And if you are my firstborn, then you are meant to have my inheritance. And of course, this all leads to Jesus. Jesus is the only begotten Son of God, obviously the firstborn, if you're the only begotten. And if we are baptized into Jesus, then we are the Son of God as well. Even the women. Sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? I don't want to be a son, I'm a daughter. You are, you don't lose your femininity. But to say that we have been baptized into the Son of God so that we can obtain the riches and the rewards and the glory of the perfection of God himself. Heaven, where God is meant for us. Are you willing to accept that inheritance by letting go of all the temporal things that will not last? To be delivered from all that holds us back from fully giving ourselves over to God, who calls us. We hear that in our second reading, and we hear that in our gospel. Now remember, again, last week in our gospel, it was James and John, the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, who ask a selfish question of Jesus. We want you to do for us whatever we want from you. And Jesus allows such an arrogant question because there was something to learn from it. 2,000 years later, we can still learn from it. And today, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, gets to call out on Jesus and ask a question as well. Might seem a little selfish, but first let's just recognize that Mark, the gospel writer, says Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. Why would Mark even mention this guy's father? The early church community must have recognized this name. He must have been a big deal. Of course, the fact that his son got healed by Jesus, I would hope that would affect him in a big way. And to be able to accept Jesus and say, oh, all right, and could have been someone who was a big evangelizer. But I also find it interesting that Mark would even give this phrase, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. Because Bartimaeus literally means son of Timaeus. It's what his name means. And so he would say it in there twice. But again, it's this theme of being a son. God is our Father. And God calls to us deliverance. What else keeps us from God besides our own addictions, but sometimes our own brokenness from other authority figures, perhaps our own dads? How can I see a perfect heavenly Father when all that's been before me is an imperfect earthly father or mother or uncle or grandparents? How can I believe that God the Father wants to deliver even them, let alone myself, when all I've experienced or have allowed myself to see is the brokenness, instead of God's grace in the midst of it, and accept the good things that have happened along with the bad? It just becomes more difficult for us to be receptive to all that God has desired for us. Are we aware of that? In our gospel today, Bartimaeus is a great encouragement for all of us because he calls out to God, Son of David. He's using that word again. Have pity on me. And everyone else nearby was telling him to be quiet, trying to shut him down, keeping him away from Jesus. Who in your life is keeping you away from Jesus? From having the courage, like Bartimaeus, to call out on his identity. Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. I have weaknesses, I am broken, I have struggles, and so many people around me are trying to keep me from you. But I will call out all the louder. And then notice this interesting twist that Jesus does. Because God calls out to all of us. And in this case, Jesus tells his followers, you call him. But we just got done trying to keep him away from you. I let that happen because there's a lesson to be learned here. Now go and call him. Oh, all right. Stick my foot in my mouth and go. Take courage. He was already the one more courageous than you. Jesus wants to talk to you. And Bartimaeus went to him. He didn't let anyone keep him down, but he waited for Jesus to call on him. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? Very different than last week. Jesus, we want you to do for us whatever we want. But Bartimaeus waited for God's invitation. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus says, Master, I want to see. And here's such an important line. Jesus says, go your way. Your faith has saved you. What great respect. What great confidence that Jesus has in this broken man. Go your way. Your faith has saved you. And then here's another way in which we learn from Bartimaeus. What was Bartimaeus' way? In his courage, he calls out to Jesus. And Jesus says, go your way. And Bartimaeus, it says, immediately he received his sight and followed him on his way. Bartimaeus' way was lined up with Jesus' way. So first, will you accept the redemption of God? Will you accept his healing? Will you call out to God in public? That God would heal you. That God would tear down all the roadblocks that keep you from him. And then when he does, and you accept it and notice it and recognize it and go, that was God. Which way will you go? God has called each of us by name for many different tasks. And in our second reading, we hear the task of the high priest. The letter to the Hebrews is talking first and foremost about the Old Testament priesthood. And it says that every high priest is taken from among men and made their representatives before God. But it says, no one takes this honor upon himself, but only when God called by God. Have you recognized God working in the midst of young men around you? And help to make that clear. And ask, do you think God is calling you to the priesthood? That is not something to take lightly. It's something to pray about. To call out to God. Lord, in my brokenness, I think maybe you're calling me? You better make that clear, Lord. But it's not without precedent. Even in the Old Testament, it says, each high priest, is able to deal patiently with the ignorant and the erring, those who continue to fall in error, for he himself is beset by weakness. And so for this reason must make sin offerings for himself as well as for the people. We are meant to be humble in order to serve a perfect God who is delivering us and making us perfect But it's a process. We don't fully become perfect until we have followed him on the way to heaven, where we will be made perfectly perfect. And in perfect relationships instead of inappropriate relationships, nothing will be holding us back from being joy-filled. Because, as we said in our responsorial psalm, the Lord has done great things for us. We are filled with joy that becomes fulfilled in heaven, but we are to participate in it now. Call out to God, who is calling out to you. Ask him for healing. Receive his joy, recognizing there's a process. Yes, in our gospel, Bartimaeus fully could see right away. It doesn't happen to everybody. Sometimes it's a process, but he's still working in you. Are you allowing yourself to see that? And insofar as you say, like, that's difficult, I can't see it, then ask the Lord to show you what's keeping you from seeing that. Your own weaknesses, your own addictions, your own reception of other people's weaknesses and their pain and how they've mistreated you, which means unforgiveness is sometimes keeping us from seeing the good work that God is doing in your life. That's my encouragement for you, to receive God's goodness, to call out to him, recognizing he is calling out to you. We are all sons of God in our baptism into Jesus Christ. He has done great things for us. And sometimes he's asking us to call out to others to recognize how God is working in their life too. So don't be afraid of that as well. Do you know, are there any young men in here who have thought maybe God is calling them to the priesthood? Or maybe to be a monk, a brother? Are there any young women in here, young girls, who think maybe Jesus is calling them to be his bride, to be a nun, a sister? God is going to do great things for you if we're willing to recognize his healing power and to accept it and to call out on God who calls on us.